So I speak to many analysts on a day-to-day basis, and they usually think that you need to be an expert in every single tool in order to become a data analyst. However, that is not the case. And in this video, I'm gonna go into how deep you need to actually know a tool before getting your first job as a data analyst. Let's get into it. So if you're new, my name is Zazo. I've been in data analytics 4 years at this point, and I am currently a senior data analyst. Previously, I did work as a software engineer. So let's start off with the biggest and the baddest of them all. SQL or SQL, whatever you prefer to call it, it doesn't really matter. But this is the mecca. I always suggest data analysts, if they are going to go too deep into one of these skills, SQL is always the one to go the furthest in. So now I'm going to go into kind of the aspects of SQL that you need to know in order to be a data analyst. What you'll need to do for sure is know how to pull data from different tables and joining on different tables. Obviously, that does mean you need to know joins. The next thing is make or write queries that other people can actually read, because in data analytics, you're gonna have queries or multiple different queries that many different people on the team will use, but sometimes it's hard to trust a query if it's not really readable. So make sure that your queries are readable. That way, anybody on your team, one, really knows what you're doing if they're checking your work, or two, if they need to use it, it's clear to see what it actually does. The next thing, and one of the key things here, is knowing how to handle messy data with SQL. I see this all the time where analysts don't actually know how to clean up data in SQL itself, and a lot of the time they'll do it in Excel. They'll just use SQL to kind of grab the raw data and then do a lot of manipulation in Excel or some type of ETL tool. If you can learn to kind of clean your data in SQL before you ever kind of take it into one of those tools to start to really analyze it, then that's going to make you a lot better off, because you're going to start with a better foundation initially. This next thing is very important: how to use subqueries in CTEs and when to use either one of them. So when I first started, I was strictly just a subquery guy, and later in my journey I realized that CTEs can be very useful. They both have their different cases on when it's better to use one or the other, but if you're dealing with a bunch of different things, most of the time CTEs make it kind of more, I would say, cleaner to one, write and also to read. And subqueries, normally how I like to go is if it's a sort of quick pull but there's a little bit of intricacies, I like to use subqueries. That's my preference. Learn how to use both. And the next thing is actually just learn SQL to answer business questions without guessing. So a lot of people, like I said, take raw data and kind of put it in another tool in order to actually gain or glean some type of insights from it. But the better you can be with SQL and being able to do that initially really kind of sets you up to make your job easier, because if you think about it, if you can just be good at just SQL and you can do a lot of these different things with SQL, then it kind of covers up the fact of maybe you're not as strong in Excel or something like that. But if you're really strong in SQL, most of the time that's kind of gonna get a lot of the stuff done, because yes, there's data in spreadsheets, yes, there's data here, yes, there's data there, but the most common way for data to kind of be presented to you is going to be in some sort of database. So the easier it is for you to do all you need to do in SQL before ever having to kind of like output results or do anything like that, is going to make it better and easier for you, as well as just being able to be more hireable, because you can do that all within one tool. So I'm also going to go into some things you don't necessarily need to know at this point. So you don't really need to know query optimization. When I say this, I'm meaning like at an engineer level, like data engineers really need to know how to optimize queries to be the most efficient at all times, do things like that. And you don't need to know that yet. Another thing I see is analysts trying to learn like indexing, which is cool and all, but data analysts really don't need to know how to index different tables in databases. That's more on the data engineering level. And then also database administration. Don't learn, how to create tables and do all this type of stuff yet. As an analyst, you probably won't need to do that most of the time. I've never had to create an actual like table within SQL. If you're a data engineer or something like that, of course, that's a little bit different and you'll have to do a bunch of different things that are out of the scope of this video, but those are some things you probably shouldn't focus on. So the next thing is going to be Python. I see this so many times where people try to convince me that they're ready to be a data analyst because they know Python very well. Now, don't get me wrong, Python is important, but in data analytics, you kind of just use it when you need it. SQL, you kind of need it all the time. Python, depending on what company you work for, what type of data you're actually pulling, small company, big company, maybe there's not a lot of data. Maybe you don't need the fastest script to clean data and do that type of stuff, and you can just pull data, or it might even be in spreadsheets. But if you're going to learn Python, the things that you are going to need to know are how to read, clean, and analyze data. Specifically with pandas is very popular and kind of, you can't go wrong doing your stuff there with pandas library. This is where it starts to come in, like the real power of Python, which like I said, you won't always need depending on where you work, but how to automate repetitive tasks with Python. So if there's a specific type of data cleaning that you're doing every single time because you get the same report or same messy data or whatever it may be, you can use Python to kind of automate the cleaning aspect, and maybe you just analyze the data for that specific report or whatever you're working on. So another thing is like I said before, if you have something like spreadsheets specifically and there's no type of database or anything like that where there is an opportunity to use SQL, then Python will be very great for cleaning data, automating the data that's not necessarily in some type of database. Another thing is if you do need to run some type of statistical model or some type of test, then you can do this within Python. Now this is very niche, I would say, but chances are if you're using statistical models and those types of things, I'm assuming you're gonna be in a database, but that could just be me. And probably smaller companies want you to do some type of statistical modeling with Python, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But these are kind of the top things that I would say use Python for. Every company does not necessarily need this level of analysis. Here's what you don't need to know about Python when you're becoming a data analyst, at least at first. You don't need to know how to make complex machine learning pipeline that does all these different types of things. I see a lot of different applications and people using all of these big fancy NLP and all of these different types of things that they know of Python. Chances are if you're in a data analyst role, if that's your main goal, that is something that takes a while to kind of learn and learn well. And sometimes it just doesn't have that much benefit depending on the position that you're applying for. I'm speaking specifically for data analysts or an entry level role data analyst. You don't need to know deep object-oriented knowledge. That's more for like software engineering. I wouldn't waste my time on it up front. And the next thing is perfect code architecture. A lot of the times you're kind of just being scrappy if you're using Python, at least at first. Your company might have some type of structured way of doing it, but from what I've seen, there's no reason to go overboard on learning, coding architecture and all this type of knowledge on how to structure everything perfectly. Just know the things that I stated before and you should be good. So this is how I'd like to think of Python. Python is great when SQL or Excel kind of won't do the job, which is few and far between, but there are some cases where it can definitely be more efficient to do it in Python. So this is something I'd probably put at maybe I wouldn't say the back of the list, but towards the bottom. All right, so the next thing we're gonna go with is Excel. I knew you knew it was coming. It was coming. But Excel, what you should know. So you should know some for functions, some VLOOKUPs, some sum if, those types of things, condition, and, VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, those types of things are going to be useful for Excel. The next thing is pivot tables. Everybody knows this is coming. When you're going to need to kind of present or kind of see some visual aspect of the data, pivot tables are great for some really quick insights when you're doing some small analysis and things like that. Some basic charts to visualize any type of trend or anything like that. And something like how to structure your sheet so that other people can also follow the logic that you're kind of doing, and if there's any tables or any type of formulas or different things you're doing, kind of making that clear enough to kind of see, because I've seen some messy ass spreadsheets that you don't know what is going on where. So be aware of that. So the things that you probably can skip up front or are some like ultra fancy, formulas. You probably don't need to know all of that right now. Power Query and Power Pivot, you probably don't need to know that. And then, Visual Basic or the macros, you really don't need to know that up front. That can come with time, and if you learn how to use them efficiently to kind of complement your job, then I guess that's fine, but you really just don't need to know it. So Excel is kind of still the fastest way to kind of collaborate, look at stuff really quickly and have like a sanity check, and just explore numbers. So Excel is kind of always going to be there. All right, so the last and final thing is going to be business intelligent tools. So I mean the Tableaus, the Power BIs, the Looker, and this is basically key to how to communicate insights and make good visuals in order to give a clear picture of what the data is saying. So what you're going to need to be able to do is you're going to need to be able to connect data sources. This is obviously a fundamental thing. If you have to connect to a database, if you have to connect to an Excel spreadsheet, how do you consistently update that spreadsheet? How do you build that out? So connecting the data source is going to be the first thing. The next thing is, you probably guessed it, but build dashboards from scratch. Yes, updating dashboards, you might be doing that when you are new to the team, but at some point you're going to have to learn to build a dashboard for yourself from scratch. You're gonna need to create clear charts, filters, and drop downs. And when I say clear charts, this is a very important thing. Charts that explain the data. So if you're talking about something like pure counts or sums or something like that, you probably shouldn't be using a line chart, because line chart is for seeing stuff over time. That's one of the common ways that it's used. And I've seen some bad visuals that are just hard to follow just because analysts pick the wrong type of chart. So that's one of the keys. Be able to add basic calculations in a tool. So a lot of time when you're prepping your data, there's something that you may not have considered. So when you connect it to that data source, it comes in a form and you may need to add two columns together or something of that nature in order to kind of get another number that you want to show on your dashboard. So being able to do some calculations within the BI tool itself is going to be important. And you also want to follow design principles. At my job, we have a kind of like standard way of doing it, but companies may not have that, but you kind of want to make sure that it's still readable. How many times I've seen really clustered up like charts and sheets on different dashboards is really crazy. And it should not look like you just try to stuff every data point into one dashboard. So what you don't need to know is you don't need to know UX, UI, and color theory and all this types of stuff. Like, yes, it should look good. Yes, it should be aesthetically pleasing to a certain degree, but you don't need to go down that rabbit hole and kind of become a whole, designer of some sort. And you also don't need to know every single advanced chart style. Like I said, get a chart or get a visualization that speaks to the data that you are trying to tell a story about, not necessarily knowing how to do like a Gantt chart and do all these different things if it doesn't tell the story that you're trying to tell. Now, this is very important. This is one of the ways that non-technical stakeholders actually see your work and your impact. So don't forget this one. So now I'm gonna go into the quick recap and also the order I would recommend kind of learning these tools. So the first one's gonna be Excel. This is the quickest way to kind of get thinking like an analyst and doing some simple upfront analysis and kind of solving business questions. It's kind of the ultimate tool to kind of get started as like a rookie, I would say. The next one's going to be SQL, because this is the foundation for real data sets. Like I said, all companies are gonna have stuff in a data warehouse, a database of some sort, and you're gonna have to pull the data. The next thing is Power BI, Looker, or Tableau, one of those BI tools, because this is how you take your insights that you found in Excel/SQL and put it into a way that non-technical users can actually understand. And this is the way that you drive business impact. And then the last one is going to be Python, because this is just going to be a complementary kind of like sprinkle on top, cherry on top to your skills. It makes things easier, makes things faster. You can do a lot with it, but that's not necessarily the core of the job, at least at first. So the key thing to think about here is you have to build your analytical thinking first, and then you build up from there. So this is the one key takeaway I want you to get from this. Don't try to learn everything. Try to learn what matters first, and then complement that with other tools later. This is the end of the video. Love, peace, and chicken grease. I'll see y'all in the next one.